My name is Liam Archer. I'm 29, and in my family, there has always been an invisible seating chart. Maya, my sister, with the bright career and camera-ready smile, sits in the center. Julian, my brother, orbits our father's approval like a careful moon that never drifts. My mother, Elaine, smooths napkins into perfect shapes and calls it kindness. Aunt Celeste arrives with a glass of sweet tea that is never just tea and a pocket full of gossip. I hover near the folding chairs, useful when the printer jams or the Wi-Fi blinks. Ask them about my reputation, and they'll point to sophomore year when I walked out of college. Their version is tidy. The truth was smaller and heavier. A financial aid change landed mid-semester. The math refused to pretend. Rent didn't negotiate, and my campus cafe shifts couldn't plug a black hole. The registrar slid a withdrawal form across the counter. I told myself it was one semester off. Paper said otherwise. After that, I stacked jobs. 2, then 3. Days under humming lights at a strip mall kiosk, nights in a battered sedan that smelled faintly of fries. On good weeks, I slept 5 hours and dreamed in numbers, due dates, balances, midnight deposits. Somewhere in the noise, I found something steady, the quiet satisfaction of making broken things whole. A cracked screen clears to glass, a dead battery wakes up at 87%. At a workbench with tweezers and solder, the world dimmed to a solvable puzzle. The first time I told my father Robert I could repair his phone, he offered a thin smile that meant no. Not unkind exactly, just a verdict. Mom suggested we let a professional handle it, as though accuracy required a stranger. Aunt Celeste texted herself a headline to circulate. Liam is doing phone screens now. The family chat lit up with pitying emojis. I flipped my own phone face down and adjusted my notifications, the ones in my pocket and the ones in my head. People say your 20s are for trying things. Mine were for closing doors softly and moving on. I stopped bringing dates to holidays. I stopped sending applications that asked for a credential I didn't have because I could already hear the sigh in the margins. Instead, I became quietly good at a narrow slice of work almost nobody wanted to do. Board-level repairs, forensics light data recovery, translation between panic and plain language for small businesses that bleed cash when a point of sale dies on a Saturday. Word of mouth did what blood never bothered to. Show up when you say, return devices when you promise. Explain without making anyone feel stupid. Prices become a conversation, not a confession. I rented a workbench in the back of a computer shop owned by a retired teacher who liked the version of me that existed in plain sight. On paper, I was still the kid who left school. On invoices, I was the person who restored a school's attendance records and kept a bakery open after a lightning strike. Those felt like 2 different lives until one day they didn't. The work accumulated into a shape that made sense. I learned to carry both truths, the family's label and the city's referrals. One shouted, the other knocked. When Maya got engaged last winter, the family thread exploded into fireworks venues, palettes, playlists. Dad promised to cover the bar. Mom curated mood boards. Julian volunteered for the music like he was going to war. I typed congratulations and sent a gift I could afford a private cooking session through a chef who owed me a favor and actually liked my sister. Maya, unlike the rest, sometimes texted on random Tuesdays to ask how my week was. Now and then she said, "You're really good at what you do." It mattered even if I never said so. The morning of our annual reunion, Maya called. "You're coming, right? Please?" She wanted neutral ground before the wedding, gathered us all in one room with name cards and speeches. Her fiancé, Noah, a civil engineer. I'd met twice, listened more than he spoke. He asked questions as if he were asking to pet your dog, respectful, interested, easy to decline. I wasn't sure he'd weathered a full Archer gathering. I said yes. Not because the house felt welcoming, but because Maya asked and because I'd started to suspect the weather was shifting, if only by a degree. I parked a block away from Aunt Celeste's house, a place staged like a magazine spread where every surface had a bowl and every bowl had a purpose. The lawn looked rehearsed. I sat in my car for an extra minute and practiced the same small ritual I always did before stepping into a room that had already decided who I was. Breathe in, breathe out. Shoulders loose, smile that doesn't promise too much. Celeste opened the door as if she had been waiting with one hand on the knob. "There you are," she said, the words sparkling like ice. "Do come in and try not to cause any fuss." Her perfume outran her by a full second. Over her shoulder, I watched heads pivot the way birds turn toward weather. Mom Elaine busied herself with a tray. Dad Robert had that stance he likes, one hand in a pocket, the other claiming a drink. Julian drifted over and squeezed my shoulder. "Let's keep it smooth tonight, okay," he murmured, like a manager rehearsing a performance plan. I nodded and made it easy for him to think we agreed. The first hour was choreography compliments, on the decor shallow jokes, a tour of the renovated kitchen. Celeste pressed a glass into my hand and announced to the room, "Non-alcoholic for Liam," as if someone had requested a statement. A cousin tilted her head with professional sympathy. "Found anything stable yet?" she asked, the tone you reserve for a neighbor's lost cat. Before I could answer, Dad chuckled, gentle and flattening. "He keeps busy." The words hung under the ceiling fan like fruit that never ripens. I pivoted to a topic everyone liked, a team I don't follow, a game I didn't watch. Laughter came easy once I left myself out of it. Maya found me near the deviled eggs, pressed a quick hug into my side and whispered, "I'm sorry." It was the kind of apology that tries to cover a decade. Her fiancé Noah hovered close, polite, observant the way engineers can be when they're mapping a structure. He offered a normal handshake, uncalculated. "Glad you could make it," he said, and meant it. I stayed near the edges of the room where exits are visible and you can see a storm forming. The kitchen island became a planet bowls in precise orbits, a honeyed ham crackers arranged like dominoes. Someone set a framed photo of my grandparents among the salads. Their faces looked less strained than anyone else's. They had done this pageant too, in some other decade with different curtains. Toasts braided themselves out of gossip and pride. Maya's new role, Julian's, maybe promotion, Celeste's sermon about family sticking together, no matter what, a line that always arrives with a target. The shift started small. A neighbor wandered in with a casserole, and because I stood closest to the door, I took it. "Careful," she said. Surprised? "You're strong." Then, unarmed by the house rules, she asked the question no one here was supposed to. "So what do you do?" She asked it kindly without the family's script. I answered before anyone could translate. "I repair systems and recover data," I said. "Mostly small businesses and schools. I run a small shop and consult." The temperature dropped by a degree. Noah's head tilted interest, not skepticism. Dad's eyes slid over without moving his face. Celeste's smile brightened a notch too much. "He's being modest," she chimed, and for half a second I let hope rise. Then she added, "He tinkers, keeps our toasters alive." Laughter rolled through the room, easy and weightless, because it wasn't theirs to carry. I smiled with my eyes, not my teeth. "The toaster still hasn't sent a thank you card," I said lightly. The neighbor laughed. The moment drifted past, but the song had started. Dinner came with place cards, Celeste's favorite control system. She put me between Noah and a cousin who curates other people's business like charms on a bracelet. Across from me sat Dad with Julian orbiting his shoulder. You could feel the table wait for its beat. Noah leaned in, voice quiet enough to spare me. "Can I ask you more about your work?" He had the good questions, the kind that cost time. I gave careful answers about diagnostics, solder drive images, the habit of promising only what you can deliver. His curiosity felt like a handhold. Then a seat scraped. A friend of Maya's, loud by nature, not malice, dropped into the open chair beside Noah. "What do you do, Liam?" she asked at her natural volume. Forks paused midair. Heads turned on instinct. The house rules reasserted themselves like a chorus. I kept my tone even. "I repair and recover data." I said again, "A shop plus some consulting." She blinked. "Consulting for who?" Before I could sand down the edges. "Noah." Ever the engineer reached for a reference. "What's your company called?" he asked, casual. "Simply closing a loop," I told him. He typed as the table's hum lowered to a careful pitch. Celeste sparkled across the linen just loud enough. "Be careful, Noah," she sang. "You'll be bored to tears reading about broken microwaves and second-hand laptops." A ripple of laughs obliged her. Julian lifted his glass with a small smirk, like he had been waiting for the scene change. Mom pressed her palm flat against the tablecloth, willing a crease to smooth itself out. Dad tapped his fork once against his plate, the family's doorbell for "Don't escalate." I could have corrected the record. In this house, that would be taken as aggression. I could have fought back with a joke. That would be filed as defensiveness and retold later as proof. I could have left, but exits become stories, and the storyteller is never the one who leaves. So I held the stillness I've trained for breathing, slow shoulders, soft eyes on nobody and everyone. Julian couldn't resist a stage. "You know what's funny?" he said louder than necessary. "Last year, Dad almost had to cover one of Liam's bills. Guy was short on rent. He spread his hands as if he had revealed a magic trick. Conversation thinned to thread. Forks froze. My face heated, and not because it was untrue in shape. Months earlier, before a large contract landed, I had asked Dad not for a handout, but a small short-term loan I intended to repay within weeks. He said no. The end. I had not invited the room. Julian wasn't done. "Some people never figure it out," he added, grin widening. "Dreams don't pay bills." The cousins laughed with the relief of permission. Celeste covered her mouth like she had heard something delicious. Maya's eyes flicked to mine with a plea I couldn't answer without making it worse. Noah kept his gaze on his phone, and for the first time that evening, his jaw tightened. Dad cleared his throat voice calm, as if calm were a virtue. "It's true," he said, and looked at the table instead of me. He came to me in trouble. I told him he needed to stand on his own 2 feet. "We don't celebrate failure in this family." The last sentence landed like a stamp. Not angry, just final. The kind of verdict that asks the room to nod and move on. No one moved on, not inside my chest. The word failure pressed in like a hand. Mom auditioned a laugh that didn't make it to her eyes. A cousin started to whisper. Celeste smiled with knives in it. Julian sat back satisfied, as if he had executed a clean pass. Dad took another sip and inspected the far wall. I stayed very still, because stillness was the only thing that didn't make a mess. Across the linen, Noah's screen lit his face. I watched recognition move through him, curiosity focus, then something sharper. He glanced from the phone up to me, as if confirming an equation. Celeste tried to grab the moment back. "Anyway," she trilled, "who wants coffee?" She lifted her glass to redirect the weather. The table pretended to breathe again, clinked and scraped in relief. But there, it was the smallest sound that changes a room. Noah's thumb hovered over a link bearing my company's name. The glow from the screen caught the rim of his glass. The conversation around us skittered forward in fragments, all of it suddenly thinner. Dad's fork tapped once more, less a warning than a habit. Julian leaned in, waiting for a flinch. Maya's hand found Noah's wrist, a gentle check, not here, not now. He didn't look at her. His expression was careful, professional, almost clinical, the face of a person who has found a data point that contradicts the story he's been handed. I held his gaze for the first time all evening, not pleading, not performing. Just there, the version of me that exists outside this house, the one who shows up when systems are dark and people are out of road. Noah lowered his eyes to the phone again. The room continued its imitation of calm. Aunt Celeste laughed too brightly at something no one had said. Mom adjusted a salt shaker that didn't need adjusting. Dad's jaw worked once a silent grind. Noah tapped. The table didn't know yet, but a new page had opened, and the room could feel the temperature change by a degree. I drove home from Aunt Celeste's house with the window cracked, letting the cool air scrape the heat off my face. The evening replayed in loops Julian's grin. Dad's even voice, the word failure, pressed like a stamp. But underneath the noise, a steadier sound kept knocking the sense that my life didn't have to run through that room anymore. I could change the route, not with speeches, not with a scene, but with the slow, heavy work of building something that didn't need them to see it in order to be real. The next morning, I opened the shop early and wrote 3 lists on a legal pad. What I did, what I could prove, what I would no longer do. I crossed out the vague favors and the pay, you next week rescues that always turned into prolonged apologies. I added a line for service-level terms and another for deposits. By lunch, I had a draft of a policy that sounded like a promise to my future self. No more apologizing for expertise. No more pretending my work was a hobby because it made other people comfortable. I filed paperwork that week, licenses, tax IDs. The tray of filings that make a business something more than a name in a pocket. I paid a designer for a clean logo and a website that didn't look like it had been assembled from leftovers. I rewrote my pitch in plain language and pushed it to the front page, data recovery, and secure systems for teams that cannot go dark. The sentence felt like a spine. The first big test arrived late on a Friday, the kind of call that sits in your voicemail like a small explosion. A mid-sized medical practice had been locked out of its patient records by ransomware. The office manager's voice shook. You could hear fluorescent lights and fear behind her words. I told her I'd be there in an hour, called 2 contractors I trusted, and packed the car. We were in that clinic all weekend, living on coffee and grocery store sandwiches. I imaged drives, extracted what the attackers had failed to wipe, rebuilt the directory structure, the way a mason measures a wall line by line, level by level. By Monday morning, the practice could log in again. We set up versioned backups, rotated credentials, and trained the staff without talking down to them. When the manager shook my hand at 6 a.m., her eyes brimmed like she'd slept in fear and woken to daylight. "We thought we were done," she said. "You gave us our work back." A week later, she referred me to 2 other clinics. 1 contract became 3, 3 grew to 5. It wasn't luck. It was a series of right promises kept on time. I hired my first full-time employee. That spring, a classmate I remembered from a hardware lab sharp patient, allergic to shortcuts. I handed him a key and a sweatshirt with the new logo, and he laughed the way people laugh when a version of their life suddenly feels possible. 2 months later, I hired a second, a network tech who could speak infrastructure without sneering who treated. I don't know yet as a way to get to, here's the plan. We outgrew the rented bench in the back of the computer store and moved into a 2-room office downtown, no view, except a slice of sky and the angled reflections of a parking garage. The first morning I turned the key, the air inside smelled like paint and cardboard. I put the workbenches against the wall, set up a small reception desk, and rolled a whiteboard to the center like a flag. It wasn't fancy, it was ours. I told myself a simple truth: if the work is honest, the address doesn't have to brag. The invoices changed, retainers appeared. I added a line for response within 4 hours and meant it. We built starter kits for small businesses, backups that actually restored security settings, that survived turnover, a checklist, in a shared folder that didn't require a guru to understand. I found that the most valuable thing we offered wasn't magic, it was rhythm. Show up when you say, and systems stop breaking at 2 a.m. Word of mouth did more than any ad. A bakery owner told a florist. The florist told a school librarian. A lawyer mentioned us at a lunch and then emailed asking if we could recover from an encrypted archive no one else wanted to touch. I learned to say yes only when yes meant yes, and no when the risk would burn time we didn't have. We lost a few bids to bigger firms with glossy brochures. Some of those clients circled back later when the glossy couldn't pick up the phone. A local business magazine ran a feature called Under the Radar Builders, and we made the list. The profile was small, a few photos of the office, and a quote about how prevention costs less than panic, but it made a difference. A board member of a regional development council saw it and invited me to sit on a panel about small business security. Half hour, 2 microphones, a slide deck with 7 slides, and no jargon. I talked about backups like fire drills and passwords, like doors that actually locked. Afterward, 3 people waited to ask questions. One of them ran a regional bank. 2 weeks later, that bank called on a Sunday night because a server had failed and the backups weren't behaving. We walked in with coffee and left 3 days later when the system stood upright again. Before I could catch my breath, they proposed an ongoing contract maintenance risk reviews, a standing phone number for when lights blinked at the wrong time. The retainer figure made me blink. I didn't say yes in the room. I asked for a day, ran the numbers, and called my lawyer friend to translate the parts of the agreement that were designed to trip the unwary. Then I signed. The day the first check cleared, I sat in the office with the door closed and let myself feel the shape of it, the distance between where I'd been and where the work had carried me. The bank contract changed a lot of things that didn't show on a spreadsheet. Suddenly, I was sitting in boardrooms with people who had budgets and calendars built years out. I learned that fear has dialects: compliance, fear, reputational fear, outage fear, and that my job was not to amplify them, but to convert them into a list we could do in order. I added a line on the website Advisory Services for Leadership Teams. The word advisory made me wince at first, like I was playing dress-up. Then I heard a project manager repeat something I'd said verbatim in another meeting, and I realized names only feel big until they fit. Maya called one afternoon with a question that sounded casual but carried weight. "Hey Liam, could you talk to Noah's team? They're struggling with data management on a major project. I told him you might have ideas." Noah worked for a nationally respected engineering firm, the kind of company that drew lines on maps you could see from airplanes. I walked into their conference room a week later and listened before I spoke. Their issue wasn't talent, it was drift. Files lived in 11 places. Naming conventions were wishful. Versions competed like cousins. We started with a workshop, 2 hours a whiteboard, and the sentence, "All chaos is a system." Ours just isn't one we chose. We built a hierarchy that matched the way they actually worked, not the way an outdated policy imagined they should. We put retention rules in writing, automated the boring parts, and taught the team to treat file names like addresses that other people had to find in the dark. When one of their project managers told me I didn't know order could be this humane, I wrote the sentence down and taped it inside a cabinet. In a month, the firm asked for a contract. Not emergency rescue this time, architecture reviews and a standing role in projects that would throw shadows across a skyline. That connection to Noah's company threaded its way back to my family without me doing a thing. He never bragged, but engineers talk like rivers join, and in certain circles it became normal to hear my name, followed by the person who saved us a quarter. A client mentioned me to a state official. The official attended a talk and then stopped by the office to shake hands and ask about security for small municipalities. I learned to wear a jacket when the occasion called for it and to take it off as soon as we sat at the bench. Whispers reached home in pieces. An uncle forwarded the magazine article with a subject line that made fun of the photo but not the facts. A cousin texted that she'd seen my logo on a flyer and asked if I was doing okay, now a question shaped like concern and curiosity both. Dad didn't call, but Maya admitted he'd asked how many employees I had. He phrased it like math, she said gently, as if numbers will let him believe what he won't ask you. I told her she didn't have to pass messages. She laughed a small, relieved laugh and changed the subject to the ceremony seating, something concrete we could move around without bleeding. I didn't make announcements. I stopped posting personal victories when I realized how quickly the internet chews them into confetti. I let the work carry the news where it needed to go. Some days that felt like patience. Other days it felt like self-preservation. The truth is, vindication is loudest when it doesn't have to raise its voice. In late spring, the same council member who had spotted our magazine profile asked if I would consider joining the Regional Business Council. It wasn't a glamour committee, and it wasn't pretend. The agenda touched grants, training programs, and recommendations that would help decide which companies got a footing. I sat through 3 meetings as a guest, said as little as possible, then said yes. The first time I voted, it was on a small grant that would keep a literacy nonprofit from closing a location. I walked back to the office with the feeling that power in its sanest form is the ability to put weight where it will do the most good. The council seat changed the angle of a lot of rooms. People who didn't return emails started returning calls. Folks who'd once asked for discounts now asked for advice. I kept the workbench clear and the calendar tighter. I scheduled time to read incident reports from other cities, to run tabletop exercises with my team, to build the muscle you only build by practicing for bad days on good ones. Through all of it, I didn't rehearse speeches to my family. When an employee suggested we throw a small open house, I said yes, then changed my mind. The shop didn't need balloons, it needed capacity. We expanded into the empty suite next door, knocked a door-sized hole between the rooms, and moved the whiteboard without ceremony. I bought a second coffee maker because it turned out showing up on time sometimes meant brewing 2 pots at once. Every so often, a story about me circled back to the group chat. Celeste would paste a link and line it with a joke that let her both share it and pretend it didn't matter. Julian sent a thumbs-up emoji once, and nothing else. Mom, in a rare moment without gloss, wrote, "Proud of you, sweetheart." Dad sent no message I could print, but at dinner with Maya, he mentioned that Liam seems to be doing fine in the tone you use when discussing weather patterns that have inconvenienced you less than expected. I didn't answer the silence. I let it be a fact among others. By the time summer edged toward fall, our weeks had a tempo I could feel in my bones. Monday morning stand-ups, Wednesday reviews, Friday afternoon. If nothing was on fire, we closed an hour early and ate tacos on the curb outside the office, swapping stories about weird screws and miraculous saves. We were not a family, not in the way the word had trained me to brace, but we were a team, which is the kinder version. Anyway, people who show up for each other because the work is better that way. When the invitation to Maya and Noah's wedding arrived, white card gold edges. My name spelled correctly, I felt the old tug in my chest, and then a new steadiness behind it. The ceremony would pull the entire Archer constellation into one room again. But this time, the gravity wouldn't be what it was. Not because I had a speech planned or a scene in mind, I didn't. Because the story had shifted in the only way that lasts through evidence. I walked to the front counter and stood where clients usually stand. From there, the office looked different, the logo on the wall, the quiet hum of drives, the calendar blocked with commitments we intended to keep. It wasn't triumph that I felt. It was alignment. The person I was in here had finally become the person whose name other people said, without the little tilt of pity. If the family never adjusted, I would still be okay. If they did, it would be because the world around them had already turned. On the afternoon before the wedding, I stayed late to finish an on-site plan for a clinic upgrading its record system. I left the document on my desk with a yellow sticky note that read, "Double-check Step 7 and turned off the lights." Outside, the sky was the color of steel, warming to dusk. I locked the door and listened to the click echo in the hallway. No speech, no announcement. Just a key turning in a business I had built slowly enough for the foundation to set. The next day, we would all dress up and smile for photos. People would say the right things and the band would learn a Motown song on short notice because someone's aunt insisted. I would shake hands with Noah's colleagues, who knew me not as a rumor, but as a resource. Maybe Dad would look at me and see something he could not explain away. Maybe not. Either way, I had already made the only decision that mattered to let the evidence speak louder than my anger to trust the patient arc of work done well. If there is a kind of revenge in that it is the gentlest one so gentle it looks like grace. The manor looked like it had been designed to impress fathers. White columns, clipped hedges, and entrance, where voices turned soft without being asked. I arrived early and walked the empty hall just to hear my shoes make a sound. At the bar, a small placard listed evening sponsors. My company's logo sat there, neither oversized nor hidden, simply present. It felt like a full stop at the end of a long sentence. Staff greeted me by name. Noah had insisted on that. When Maya came through, hair and light and lace, she squeezed my hand and said, "Enjoy tonight." She didn't add anything about family, and I loved her for that restraint. Guests gathered the room bright with glass and good intentions. I kept to the perimeter until the conversations found me. Engineers from Noah's firm crossed the floor with an ease my family never managed. "Liam, you saved that deadline," one said, clapping my shoulder. Another, "Your framework. We sleep better now. Compliments like that don't make noise. They change gravity." Across the room, Aunt Celeste tilted her head to listen. Julian's smile thinned to a line. Robert lifted his glass and studied me the way a man studies a forecast. Dinner settled into warm rhythm, silverware stories, the soft choreography of a wedding that wants to go right. I was not performing defense. I laughed when something was funny answered when asked, and let the work speak in the mouths of strangers. That turned out to be more than enough. The toasts began. Maya's friend cried on cue. A cousin delivered a punchline that worked on the second try. Then Noah stood with a glass and the particular steadiness of someone who does math for a living. He thanked his parents, the team's the luck. And then he said, "There's one person you might not realize we owe a great deal to." He looked at me. "Liam Archer is the reason our project survived the worst week of the year. He didn't just fix a system, he gave us a way to keep our promises." Applause rose, real not explosive, the kind that settles in the ribs. I lifted my glass. I didn't glance at my family. I didn't need to. The room itself had turned to face me, and by doing so, turned away from the story that house had been telling for years. After the speeches, people returned to conversations with more context. An executive from Noah's company asked for a card. A project manager admitted she had borrowed one of my checklists wholesale. Each exchange made a small audible click inside the evening. Elaine, my mother, watched with a complicated pride she didn't know how to place. Celeste refolded her napkin twice. Julian scrolled a phone that had nothing urgent on it. Robert's jaw worked once and went still. The last turn of the night didn't announce itself. Noah's father, a tall man with a practiced handshake, approached me at the table. "Liam," he said warmly, "I've heard more than a few stories about the way you show up. This region is lucky to have your company." His voice carried just enough to reach the nearby places. "And that council seat, good work. You're putting weight where it helps. Silence doesn't always mean absence. Sometimes it's a verdict. Celeste's mouth opened and then closed. Julian's expression failed to restart. Robert set his glass down and didn't pick it back up. No scolding could live in that air. The stories they preferred didn't fit the furniture anymore. I didn't gloat. I asked Noah's father about the project he cared most about this year, listened to the answer, and thanked him for his kindness. Only then did I turn and meet my family's eyes one by one. There was nothing to correct, nothing to defend. The room had done that for me. Later, under the softer lights that follow dessert, Maya found me near the edge of the dance floor. She wrapped me in a hug that said we had come a long way from a kitchen island and a hard sentence. "I told you," she whispered. "One day they'd see." I didn't answer. Some truths don't need narration. I stepped outside for a moment and looked back through the glass. People swaying laughter at a distance, my logo on a placard doing the quiet work of existing. The night wasn't about revenge. It was about alignment, about a story that no longer required me to argue for myself. When I walked away, it wasn't dramatic. It was simple. I left the building with my head up and a life I recognized. Whatever power my family once held to name me had slipped not because I forced it out of their hands, but because I had filled mine with other better things. Thank you so much for listening to today's story. If this story resonated with you or made you reflect, I'd love to hear your thoughts, so feel free to share them in the comments below. And don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell so you won't miss the next story. I'll see you next time as we continue exploring more journeys and lessons together.